If you are looking for this video in Hindi, the link is down there in the description. यदि आप इस वीडियो को हिंदी में देखना चाहते हैं, तो लिंक नीचे डिस्क्रिप्शन में है. On the night of March 24th, 2020, 3 months into the coronavirus pandemic, which had already brought many developed nations around the world to their knees, and when India had just started reporting an increase in positive cases, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced a strict nationwide lockdown via television at 8 p.m. The lockdown was to be effective from midnight. This was a move that took the world by surprise and made for great headlines for its sheer magnitude. But it seems the policymakers had forgotten one little detail while taking such a drastic step in a country like none other. With barely 4 hours notice given about a nationwide lockdown, and with no plans or policies for the ones who have nowhere to call home but far-off villages, migrant workers have been forced to walk and cycle for thousands of kilometers, to hitchhike and pack into buses and trains, and do whatever they can to return to their homes as jobs, incomes, and means to have food and shelter dried up. So many have suffered so much over the past months, and heart-rending images and videos have surfaced. Of a child playing with his mother's body who had died of starvation. Of a mother pulling her kid on a suitcase as he sleeps. Of a man pulling his pregnant wife on a makeshift trolley. Of scores of migrants being sprayed by disinfectants like they are infected pests. The most vulnerable and poor have been dealt some of the hardest blows of the crisis, and this has raised a lot of concern, questions, doubts, and outrage of all kinds. But what we seem to have forgotten is that this ugly side of the country that we are seeing today is not actually a problem brought about by the coronavirus crisis, but the result of a much larger problem that we have been ignoring for decades. Why is this even happening in the first place? How did India fail so hard on this front? What is the root of this problem? Namaste, I'm Dhruv, and you have now entered the Indoverse. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has forced each nation to deal with this health crisis in its own way and with its own set of problems. Many have seen an exponential rise in cases and in hospitals reaching maximum capacity. Many have faced a lack of protective gear and masks. Many are seeing its citizens spreading baseless conspiracy theories and losing all common sense and trust in science. And many are not shying away from expressing their overt love for freedom, as seen by protests regarding enforcement of lockdowns or following basic hygiene practices such as using masks. But India is one of the only countries that has dealt with a problem like none other during this health crisis. Mass migration of laborers within the country and the terrible loss of livelihood to daily wage earners. But the focus of this video will not be on how this humanitarian crisis was handled or mishandled, or even on the question of the country's general response to COVID-19. No, today I will focus on the larger problem, the existence and the need for internal migration at such a scale within India. The topics that we will cover in this video are up there on the screen, and you can also find the timestamps in the video description and the pinned comment. I believe it is extremely important to understand the magnitude at which internal migration has historically been part of both the development and also the decline of modern India, and how these difficult times have just highlighted a long forgotten and ignored problem and the people associated with it. Let's start by getting to know the human beings behind the label. So, who is a migrant? The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines a migrant as a person who moves regularly in order to find work, especially in harvesting crops. This is important to understand, as before any other activity required labor as much as we need it today. It is farm workers that made up a large chunk of workers and laborers, and there is still a sizable portion of migrants that work on farms. People have been migrating from one part of the country to another since decades, even centuries, to find work elsewhere. But in today's context, anyone who has left their place of birth to work elsewhere is technically a migrant. As per Dr. S. Irudaya Rajan, faculty at the Center for Development Studies in Kerala, and an expert on migration who has tracked India's migration trends for over 35 years. Internal migrants are people either living in a place they were not born in or did not live in 6 months ago. Now that we know who is a migrant, let's see how many Indians are classified as so. The unfortunate fact is that we have next to no proper statistics, data, or studies on this segment. But the closest figures that I have come across during research for this video estimate the number of seasonal and circular migrants in India to be somewhere around 100 to 150 million or 10 to 15 crore people. This is around a quarter of the country's total workforce, which is pegged at approximately 500 million or 50 crore people, out of a total population of 1.36 billion or 136 crore. I have found n number of different sources talking about migration in different ways and forms. Migration based on place of birth, based on marriage, based on employment, based on originating from rural or urban areas, but nothing that can surely peg the number of people affected currently by the crisis. For all we know, it might be 20 million or 2 crore, or it might be 120 million or 12 crore. This simply shows how much of a huge hole there is within our policy circles, as we don't even know how many of our citizens who basically keep the country and the economy running are actually there. Think about it. We know that there are countless who have been affected and are in dire need of help, but we simply have no idea how many. Now that we know who is a migrant and how many of them are there, let's find out where they come from and go to. Out of India's 28 states, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar contribute to around 40% of this migrant workforce, followed by various other migrant-sending states, including but not limited to Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Orissa. Predictably, all of the major migrant-sending states are characterized by very low social and economic development indices. Here, a direct correlation can also be made with the widespread disease of extreme forms of the caste system, religious divide, and dirty local and state-level politics in these states. The cities of Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, and Bangalore are the largest destinations for internal migrants in India. Again, predictably, all the major migrant-receiving states are characterized by high social and economic development indices. Many of the migrants to these cities are intra-state migrants, relocating from rural areas of the National Capital Region, Maharashtra, West Bengal, and Karnataka respectively. And finally, let's try to imagine the monetary hardships of this strata of the society. As per the Politics and Society Between Elections survey from 2017 to 19, conducted by the CSDS, which is the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, the monthly household income of daily and weekly wage earners is what you see on the screen right now. As you can see, we are talking about one of the economically weakest parts of the Indian society. Almost 80% of them are earning less than Rs 10,000 or $130, and more than 50% even less than Rs 5,000 or $65 per month. Now that we know who these migrants are, let's try to understand why they leave their homes to move across the country. Most of humanity has flourished due to migration, there is no question about it. Cities, countries, and civilizations have been built due to the cultural and social mixing of people from here and there, and undeniably by the sweat and blood of migrant workforces. Today, the nature of migration and migrants remain more or less the same, but whenever the balance is skewed in terms of the number of migrants or their integration into the welcoming society, that is when the problems arise. This is also more or less the crux of the immigration issue that is gripping the world for years now. Most of the inter-country migration in India is seasonal and circular. Most migrants leave their states during seasons of drought or flood to seek safety and income, or during seasons in which crops don't really grow in their home states. This means that most of these migrants primarily leave their homes to earn money and send them back to their families, and then return to their home states and villages every few months. This also explains the mass exodus that we are looking at during this time of crisis, as all of these people are deeply rooted in their village lives and families. In a time of crisis, they want to return home, where they can find comfort with their loved ones and not starve without work in the cities. Cities never are, nor will ever be, home for them. And this nature is totally understandable. Question yourself. If you thought you were in mortal peril, confused and scared, and didn't see a way out or anyone to take care of you while you were already living a hard life, wouldn't you too want to return home? Many migrants think that if I have to die, then I would rather do it amongst my family members. So many Indians also came back to India from foreign nations before our country went into lockdown because of similar reasons, despite many times those countries having arguably better systems and medical facilities than India. Let's agree to the fact that they didn't return because India has way better medical facilities or superb governmental structure. On the contrary, it might even be harder to get help and get treated in most cases in India. They returned because of fear. Fear of falling sick or even dying alone in a country far away. Fear of not meeting their parents and loved ones one last time, just in case. Fear of just not being home. Yet another issue that is not being talked about a lot is the plight of the situation of migrants outside of India, especially the ones in Gulf countries. At present, there are nearly 8 million or 80 lakh Indian migrants in the countries comprising the Gulf Cooperation Council, namely Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, and Oman, of which nearly 2.1 million or 21 lakh are from the state of Kerala itself, and the rest from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, and Punjab. These workers are at the lowest strata of society in these countries, and their living conditions are generally horrendous. This is also a topic I want to cover in a future video separately, as this is yet another form of humanitarian crisis and slavery that is not as much highlighted as it should be. Most of them are single men living in congested labor camps and are forced to share common toilets, rooms, etc. One flat houses nearly 8 to 10 people using bunk beds in what is commonly known as a bed space. Just try to imagine the risk of infection and the feeling of helplessness these men face, so far away from home and living in countries that barely acknowledge their presence while using their sweat, blood, muscle and lives to build shiny hotels and stadiums, and where medical costs are beyond their reach. India's response to this international migrant problem is still unanswered, and yet again shows huge holes in policy making, foreign policy and crisis planning. But what has been the human cost of large-scale internal migration within India and the evils associated with it? Well, internal migration such as we have seen in the past decades in India has made the cities into the ones that we live in and cherish. The migrants are the ones that build your houses, your flyovers, your hotels and your offices. They are the ones that serve you on roadside dhabas and in big hotels and restaurants, who drive your cars and buses, who do your gardening and ironing and keep your homes and kitchens clean. They are the ones who really are the backbone of these mega cities that we live in and keep the wheels turning on a daily basis. But all of this is also a major policy failure and an endless loop. Bigger cities need more migrants, which makes these cities even bigger, thus needing more migrants, and the circle continues. There has been an immense lack of planning when it comes to India's cities, with the whole country in essence banking upon just a few of them since time immemorial, leading to them bursting at the seams with people in numbers they just can't manage. Subsequently, I can point 3 major issues with this mass migration into large cities and the human cost associated with it. Firstly, it is leading to an absolute disintegration of the most basic fabric of society, the family unit. We are talking mostly about men here, and many times women and even whole families moving from their home states for months at an end to toil hard. With these men living so far away from their families, this can sometimes lead to desensitization and distance from the family unit, further leading to overconsumption of alcohol, tobacco, and porn. So much porn. Well, this is also a topic for a future video, but the point is that many men consume way too much porn than it is healthy by any measure, as they are sexually unsatisfied and frustrated, and thus they can indulge in unsafe and unsanitary prostitution. And this directly and indirectly also leads to a high number of rape cases in cities like Delhi, where there is then yet more outcry and people secretly or openly blame those dirty and criminal migrants for everything. What we fail to understand is that basically we are paying the price of a system that has failed us, a system that is leading to crime and misery for the privileged and the poor in equal parts. And we should also not forget that with their fathers so far away, it is the kids who have to also pay the price. Having a childhood devoid of a father figure can be extremely damaging. Secondly, it is leading to an undue amount of social, infrastructural, and environmental pressure. As I have mentioned before, these seasonal migrants don't have a particular feeling of attachment to the cities that they work in, as they are deeply rooted in their actual homes, their villages. And this leads to a lack of feeling of responsibility towards a place where they don't really belong, and thus they might not act truly considerately towards the city's rules, culture, and cleanliness. Politicians also don't really care to solve this problem, as they see migrants as an easy-to-please temporary vote bank, as some of them may be registered to vote in these cities, or might even spread some good word about the political parties back home, and promise them free and subsidized amenities without really solving the real problems, and they forget about the permanent residents of the cities, and this leads to even further ill feeling. We are also seeing more and more introduction of totally new events and festivals in cities where they are usually never celebrated, and everyone clearly recognizes this as a method used by politicians to appease the migrants. Again, I'm not saying that the exchange of culture is a bad thing, but when it is so sudden and forced and there is no feeling of reciprocation from both sides, then it is a disastrous thing to happen. Cities are buckling under the pressure of carrying millions of people in metros, buses, and auto rickshaws. There are so many poor and temporary colonies that pop up in the middle of large cities, which leads to further clear examples of inequality and also leads to really bad sanitary conditions. Pollution and waste are simply too much to handle for these cities. Thirdly, it is also economically pushing the country back rather than hurtling it forward. If you ask anyone to name major cities and economic centers of India, it can be done on one hand. For a country as large as India, this is horrible. and simply shows how no one has cared to plan for local development and has never focused on flourishing local economies. It was always much easier to bank upon a handful of cities and expect everyone to find work there. This is not how a country will become a superpower, not how the lower strata of the society will be pushed into the middle class. We need constant and equally distributed development in every part of the country. The best example of this that comes to mind is that of Germany. It has the largest population in mainland Europe at 83 million or 8.3 crore, but the largest city is Berlin with over 3.5 million or 35 lakh people, with the second one being Hamburg with 1.8 million or 18 lakh people. Each major city in Germany has something that it is well known for, and there are a lot of opportunities for Germans to migrate to a city of their cultural and professional interest. For a country that is almost 9 times smaller than India in size, it is phenomenal that this kind of heterogeneity actually exists. The reasons for this can be largely summed up owing to 3 points. Firstly, the history of Germany, where smaller tribes and kingdoms that were spread across the nation led to distinct and major hubs of civilization. Secondly, the fact that Germany was razed during World War II and had to rebuild itself from scratch after 1945, which gave the country the opportunity to make cities even more specialized hubs than they were before. Thirdly, the country is extremely well spread out and well connected. If you look at its railroad network and compare it with its neighbor and the second largest country in mainland Europe, France, you can clearly see that Germany's network pretty much crisscrosses the whole nation, while France has mostly a star system, with all the tracks leading to Paris. India can and should learn from successful examples like Germany, as we too have had many local tribes, kingdoms, and states. We too had a clean state after 1947 to build ourselves from scratch. We too have a vast railway network, but for some reason, we seem to be never able to rise up from the ashes. It really makes you wonder why, doesn't it? But we can't talk about a problem about the poor or the rich without talking about the omnipresent and vast Indian middle class. It is the long-suffering middle class that has kept India running and has always been responsible for the calm and growth in the economy. But it is now and has always been bearing a disproportionately large burden on its shoulders. And it all comes down to taxation. According to the December 2017 report of the Income Tax Department, only 1.6% of Indians pay income tax. Let that sink in. Only around 22 million or 2.2 crore Indians are being directly taxed in a nation of 1.36 billion or 136 crore. India's tax base for direct taxes is simply too small. Consequently, too little tax revenue is raised, and too much of the tax burden is paid by the middle class directly. This limits the state's ability to provide infrastructure and manpower required for good governance. But this is also unsurprising since agricultural income in India is not taxed, and the wealthy have mastered the art of tax avoidance and evasion. And whenever the government announces any kind of bailout packages, or releases emergency funds, or focuses on the plight of the migrants during crises such as the current one, the middle class always asks the same questions. We are the ones who barely make ends meet, but pay almost 50% of our income in millions and billions of direct and indirect taxes. But it is the poorest who have seemed to always benefited from subsidies and free gas, wheat, rice, and sugar. We too have faced hardships and lost business. Is it not fair for us to ask for protection too? As much as we feel for the plight of the suffering migrants, are we not worthy of attention too? Also, on the flip side, some questions that the middle class should be asking itself are: have we always done enough to take care of and integrate the migrant workers better, to respect and care for the people who keep the finer cogs of our daily lives running? Do we try to educate them in general and help them and their families be better? And during crises like this one, have we made monthly payments to our maids, car washers, and watchmen during the periods of lockdown? I'm sure many of you did everything right. But in a society such as the Indian one, where trust and hope from the government to take care of everyone is next to useless, it is the people and our humanity and solidarity that actually binds the nation together. So, when I hear reports of business owners suddenly letting all of their employees go and pulling any economic cover from over the heads of the poor, I think that has played a large role in this refugee crisis as well. So, this brings us to the last question in this video. Have we learned anything from the COVID-19 crisis? The largest problem that has been a clear winner or loser in this case is about policy making. I ask this to myself day in and day out. Have the policymakers never visualized the extent of the issue of migration within India? And in general, what will it take for us to realize that we have an immense population problem that not a single political party or policymaker ever talks about? And every crisis that India faces will be multiplied by tenfold compared to the world because we are just too many. If we are worried about the coronavirus crisis, then wait till climate change actually shows its true face to us. From a World Economic Forum article from 2017, I was able to find an extract that exactly sums up my analysis of this issue. To address this issue of growing urbanization, the Government of India launched the 100 Smart Cities mission in 2015, among other urban development projects. It has also pledged massive investments into the Smart Cities project. In the last few years, smart cities have become a prominent buzzword among technologists, urban planners, the government, and the private sector. While smart cities may or may not find solutions to the issues of urbanization in India, they have already left behind a major chunk of its population, the poor and the marginalized. Among these poor and marginalized lies the doubly peripheral and ignored section of seasonal migrants. When urban planners discuss the issue of urbanization and provide smart solutions, they completely miss accounting for migrant workers as part of the city. We have no studies on this segment. They just weren't covered in policy circles. We talk only about smart cities. Now we realize that the cities need migrants as much as they need citizens. Even for this video, I had a very hard time finding comprehensive studies and data on this topic. One that is clearly affecting a whole underbelly of a country, an economy as large as India. The last question that I leave to you, my dear viewers, to think on and ask right now to yourself and to our policymakers and elected officials is, will we take this crisis as a lesson and let the light of knowledge and experience spread on, or will we carry on in the darkness like we have done for the last many decades, blind to a problem that is integral to the country and that will simply not disappear? Thanks for sticking till the end, and I hope you enjoyed this video. It would be great if you could like it and share it, and do consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon so you can show me your support and also not miss out any of the future content. I've also put a couple of videos somewhere around here so you can check them out if you're interested. As always, the comment section is open down below, where I welcome all kinds of feedback, question, debate, and discussion. I've also put some links to some great resources down in the description, so do consider checking them out and forming your own opinion. Thank you again for being here, and see you all next time. Namaste.